Welcome back. This is Business Center right here on Metropole TV, and today we are discussing about dairy farming in Kenya. And our question of the day, I had told you earlier, is how much milk does a dairy cow produce in a day? How much milk does a dairy cow produce in a day? Send us your comments. Remember to tell us where you're watching us from, and we will sample some of your answers throughout the show. And remember we are live on all our social media platforms at Metropole TV KE. Now, let's get right into it. We are joined by Moses Nyabila, who is a specialist in nutrition, in dairy nutrition. So, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Kevin.
How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, dairy farming has been in Kenya for long. Maybe we can start this conversation by looking at what are the requirements needed to practice dairy farming in Kenya?
Yes, dairy farming is a profession like any other. So obviously, agriculture usually sounds very easy, but it's not. Just by way of an example, just to get rid of the fact that it's not an easy business, I visited another Muzungu friend of mine in Nakuru. He happens to be a farmer. He has like 4,000 acres, but he also has a plane that he flies all over. So I asked him like a joke, between maintaining and piloting this plane and running your farm, which one is more complicated? He laughed. He told me farming is complicated probably 100 times more. So usually if I ask that question to any other Kenyan, he would say the plane is definitely more complicated than farming. But obviously, you know, for those that are in farming, they'll tell you farming is not easy. So what does it require to be a farmer? You have to understand farming. In Israel, they say farming and agriculture is 95% science and 5% work. So that science is about knowledge and understanding. So that is critical, just like any other form of production. The factors of production include labor, which should be labor that knows the business of dairy. You need land, and you need capital. So those three things are critical. And then the other one you need is a market for your product. Again, we usually say for those that are in agribusiness, they tell you you produce what you market. You don't market what you produce. Mm-hmm. So don't start with producing and then going to find the market. Start with the market and then produce what the market wants. So those things are critical. So to start a dairy farm, I'm sure that must be the question they're asking. It depends on the size of the business. Some are easier to start. If you want to start with 1 or 2 cows, most likely you probably get it from your parents if you're in central Kenya. In other places, you have to buy. So if you're lucky, you've been an apprentice in your father's farm, then you'll start with 1 cow, and perhaps with some basic of understanding, you can maintain a cow. So the subsistence part of dairy is the easy part. You just feed it and you get some milk. You drink, you consume some, and some you just perhaps sell to your neighbors. That's the easy part. But then as you get more professional, it becomes bigger and bigger. If you're in Australia, you're talking a cow farm of 2,000 cows and more. In South Africa, the average herd is probably about 1,000 cows. Mm-hmm. So those get more complicated, and more resources is really required to do those. So it can cost you up to $10,000 per cow to start a real dairy farm, a large-scale dairy farm. But that gives you an idea. So really, I think you have to be, you have to look at the market, then you have to look at the factors of production before you start. And then, of course, you need an expert to help you start, depending on the size of the enterprise.
All right, and now
gives you an idea.
Continue. Just continue.
The one big mistake that people do that perhaps I need to let people know. You know, sometimes I go to the village and I find someone has gone and bought some very nice cows from Githunguri, imagining the cow is doing perhaps 5,000 liters a year, the lactation. They take the cows to Karachonyo, and then they realize, one, they haven't set up the farm. The other one, they realize a cow needs like 35 or 40 kilos of feed per day. They have no clue. So they take the cow there. Suddenly they have to scramble looking for fodder. And you have to feed that every day for the whole year. So you need a lot of preparation before you bring a cow onto the farm.
All right, and now looking at the market, really, there are a large dairy farmers in Kenya and who have established systems and ready markets. But how does this translate to a new and upcoming dairy farmer, really?
Well, like I said, dairy is a value chain. So, and value chain is really, you're part of an ecosystem. If you're not, then you're in trouble. If you're part of an ecosystem, traditionally probably a cooperative, then the cooperative will do the aggregation of milk and market it for you. But it will also sort you out in terms of inputs, because what it does, it aggregates the farmers together. So with those, say, 5,000 farmers coming together, it's easier to get a vet, it's easier to get inputs, which you can get cheaper because you can buy in bulk. So, and then it's also easier to negotiate a market on a contract. So then it becomes easier now to enter. For example, if you're in any part of central Kenya, it's easier to get into dairy because you have the local cooperative that will hold your hand, and also often they provide extension as well. So that's critical. So if you're part of an ecosystem, it's much easier, and you'll also realize perhaps you've worked for someone who has a farm. Your parents perhaps had farms, so you were born in a farm. So then it becomes easier for you to do farming. So I think smallholder farmers need to band it together so that they're able to then get inputs, able to get markets, also able to get finance, because that's also critical. So farmers traditionally, when they come together, they also set up a circle, but they also have the local bank coming to work with them. So in dairy, you either come together, or you either hang, what do you call it? You either come together or you hang alone. So if you're alone, you're in trouble. Just like any other business that is a value chain. So that's critical. So that's how, because again, what we always say, farmers only learn from farmers. Farming is a very practical business. It's like rugby. You cannot learn it on PowerPoint. So you can only learn it from other farmers. So you need to be part of that ecosystem for you to really survive and grow.
All right, and now as a farmer, you have looked at maybe the capital, the land, the market. Is dairy farming profitable in Kenya? And if it is, how? Explain to us how it is really profitable.
Well, it is profitable to a point. Dairy is a mature business. So what it means is that we've done this business over time, and the prices have settled. So again, the consumers can only pay so much. So what it means, if the consumers can only pay so much, then it becomes then a volume business. And this is any other parts of the world. Again, you find the average price of milk in the West, for example, in the Netherlands, you'd find perhaps it's 20 cents euro. In the US, perhaps it's 30 cents US, which translates to 30 shillings, 35 shillings, Kenyan shillings. So worldwide, you realize the price range is anywhere between 25 shillings to somewhere around 35. In other countries like Israel, it can go higher. So again, because milk is an everyday product, you cannot sell it too premium unless it's some fancy cheese. But the rest, other value-added products like yogurts and whatnot, you can sell at a higher price. But the basic milk is a basic product. So that means if it's a basic product, you're a price taker. So that translates back to everyone. You're a processor, your margins are limited. you are a farmer, your margins are also limited. So what it means is then it's not a very, it's not a very profitable business. The only profits you make, because you make a small margin, then volume becomes critical. And this is where then our dairy farming is not as profitable for the farmer because of volume. You realize a farmer, if you have 3 cows, your overhead is already so high from the get-go, because a cow, you cannot just leave it at home and go somewhere and come back. So you have to stay on farm the whole day. If you stay on farm the whole day and you have 3 cows, the assumption is that you should be earning 20,000 or 30,000 shillings, equivalent of what you'd get in industrial area. So if you already deduct that, you realize your overhead is already so much. So the question is, if the profit is, say, 5 or 7 shillings, is how many liters do you need to make up for 30,000 shillings for you to be comfortable? That's where the problem is. So too often 3 cows are not enough. You need up to 8 cows for you to overcome your overheads and therefore begin being left with some money. Overheads is like running a matatu. If you run a matatu and you have 3 passengers going back and forth and paying 50 bob, even if somebody tells you it's profitable, it's not. But if you have a full bus, then it's profitable. So dairy is like that. So I would say dairy is a low margin business generally, unless you're selling directly to the consumer. If you are somewhere in Kitengela and you're selling directly to a hotel or a school, or you are in milk deficit areas, perhaps some places you can get 70 shillings. But in general, your price will be somewhere around 35. Your cost will be somewhere around 30, coming to around 25. If you're in Nyandarua, in some of these places, you might come down to 20. But your margins are usually somewhere around 5 bob. So that 5 bob, you have to then say how many liters do you need to survive? In my thinking, in our calculations, if you're selling less than 40 liters of milk, generally you're not making money. You're surviving. So majority of our farmers, almost 90%, are surviving, which is not a bad thing. But the question is, how can you go beyond survival? And really that is the question we are struggling with in the industry. And I'm happy to share some ideas on how to do that.
All right, and now with this situation, what can a farmer do in order to improve it, this situation that you've just explained?
Well, the first thing is the farmer should decide that it's a business. If you do some basic math, you realize 3 cows is not enough, so you need to do your numbers and say, assuming productivity is about what, maybe 4,000 liters a year. And the price is 30 shillings. If that's the case, and the margin on feed is somewhere around 50%. So when you do your numbers, you'll realize you need a certain number of cows. So generally, our smallholder farmers need to increase the density of their cows. So that means moving from 3 cows to somewhere around 8, 9, around 15 actually is ideal. So that's critical. The other one is the variable costs, because again, with the density now you take care of overheads, but our variable costs like feed is critical. Feed is like, usually if you're running an efficient farm, feed is like 70% of your cost. So if your cost is somewhere around 30 shillings, then you can imagine how much of that is feed. So what it means is then you have to reduce the cost of feed. How do you reduce the cost of feed? You can either produce feed on your farm and therefore reduce the cost, or you outsource, but you can outsource in bulk. So this is where the cooperative comes in. So we can work with the cooperatives to reduce the cost of feed. If you reduce the cost of feed by some percentage and it's 70% of your total cost, you can see your cost has come down. So I would say you should look at 2 things. Your overheads, how do you reduce your overheads? That's critical. And the overhead, a lot of it is your immediate labor, which is the minimum labor you need. So that's critical. And you reduce that by looking at your density, and then you reduce your variable costs by producing your own fodder, and it should be good quality so that your productivity is at a certain point that makes sense. You optimize on your productivity. The third way of doing this is to manage diseases. Because again, you realize the capital asset of a dairy farmer is the cow itself. So if you lose your cow, then you're really in trouble. So it's important that you take care of your calves so that you have the next round of cows. That's important, and you grow that herd. You're able to grow your herd. So it's critical that you feed them well, take care of your calves, take care of your diseases. So you immunize your cows against things like foot and mouth, East Coast fever, all those diseases that can really wipe up your herd. So again, those are things, some of them you can do at cooperative level so that you have a disease-free zone and you're able to manage those diseases. So if you manage your diseases, you manage how you feed your cows, the husbandry well, and you manage your costs, and you look at your total, the structure of your business so that the overheads are not too heavy, and you have enough cows, and then you have a market that is constant, because that's also critical part of your costs, then you can survive in this business. My advice generally is you need to be part of a group to survive, because some of those costs can only be reduced if you're working in a cooperative. If you're buying your fodder off the shelf, you just wait by the roadside, someone delivers to you, most likely they will sell it to you at the wrong time. So planning is critical. Again, you plan your season. A cow eats every day, but it doesn't rain every day. Even when you're in Kisii, you realize Kisii, even though there's a lot of rain, but it doesn't rain every day. So it's critical that you keep enough fodder. You make hay while the sun shines. That's the saying. The saying goes. So you need to, if you have 3 cows, the cows generally eat 3% of their body weight in dry matter. You need to calculate those and then prepare for the year. So some people prepare for 2 years because you can have a situation like some of the years where we don't have rain completely. So what happens to your cows? So those risks, you have to manage them too well. I think the last thing is insurance. You have to make sure that you also have insurance, because if you've taken care of your cows and each cow is worth 150 and you lose them 1,000, then you lose quite a bit of money. So those things are critical.
All right, Mr. Moses, we have to finish this, but I need to ask you this. How has dairy farming changed in Kenya in the past few years? From what you've explained, it seems that the business has really changed. Now, how has it really changed in the past few years, according to you?
Well, without going too far, I think the main events, the watershed event that happened was the failure of KCC in the early 90s, I think around 98. So when KCC collapsed, the industry collapsed. Like I told you, this industry is about ecosystem, and the biggest player in the ecosystem is the buyer. If the buyer collapses, then you're really in trouble. So part of what I tell Kenyans is, if you're the aggregator, you have to really be careful, because remember, you're holding the lives of so many people. So when KCC collapsed, all the cooperatives that were used to supply KCC, because KCC was the apex, so you had the cooperative unions and cooperative societies all over the country. They collapsed, literally. So you can imagine what happened to farmers, and with the milk being perishable. And like I told you, when the ecosystem collapses, it also collapsed with all the input supplies, networks. So KCC, that was a watershed moment. What that did was that it informalized the sector, because suddenly people started supplying milk to towns, and pasteurized milk. So for about 6 years, the sector really struggled to establish itself. That's where the likes of Brookside, Spenit came in. So again, people like Githunguri and others started to go into processing as farmers themselves. So we've seen the shift where the processed milk market collapsed, and then the informal sector became so big. Now we are beginning to reverse the situation where the processed milk is becoming a lot. I think at some point KCC was the biggest single market, single buyer of Tetra Pak in the world, just to give you an idea, at its peak. And then it collapsed. So you can imagine what happened to the industry. So the industry went down, and that meant everything. Extension systems, the vets, everyone was not paid. The domino effect. So that happened, and the sector had to reorganize itself. And since then, new cooperatives have been formed all over Kenya. Those cooperatives have gone into collections. They built their own infrastructure. So in a way, I would say the sector became decentralized, and different processes have come in. So as of now, the active processors, about 30 of them. The top tier industry doing 2 billion plus shillings a year. We are probably talking 4 or 5 major processors. I think doing beyond 5. So you have 5 billion to around 20 billion. There are about 4 companies, and then you have the second tier. Most of them are owned by farmers, and then you have the bottom. So again, I'm saying the industry is becoming better. It's not a monopoly anymore. There are a lot of other people that are giving Brookside and others a run for their money. Githunguri and others have come in. Farmers, I think, have done very well, especially the cooperative unions. Meru Central have done very well. Githunguri, of course, but others are also coming in. I think farmers are taking control of the industry, and the organizations are becoming mature. So I believe the industry has a bright future. But again, I'll tell you a few other things that need to happen, because the industry is leveling off. The question is, where will growth come from next? And that is what we are now grappling with.
All right, Mr. Moses, we need to wrap up. I've been told we just need to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll definitely have this conversation another time, because we really need to know what is happening in the dairy sector in the country. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm happy to share, Kevin. Asante sana, and take care. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we go for a break, we had asked you earlier our question of the day, which is, how much milk does a dairy cow produce in a day? How much milk does a dairy cow produce in a day? We'll just sample some of your comments throughout the show. And right now we're going to go for a short break, but we'll come back with agro commodities and agri facts.